childhood experiences, ACEs is a little more familiar with. And it affects us daily. We have to deal with it daily, especially at our elementary and our intermediate school where those students come to us. And we in public education, because of our mandatory attendance, probably see it more than most, any other profession. So I thought it would be interesting and beneficial if we had someone bring another perspective from another profession and just see what they're seeing with this type of students. To introduce our guest speaker, please welcome our Supervisor of Coordinated School Health, Dr. Carrie Clinton. Carrie.
Good morning, everyone. I have the privilege of introducing our speaker today. Dr. James Choo is a native of Knoxville, Tennessee. He graduated from Emory University in 1999 with a Bachelor of Science in Anthropology and received a Doctor of Medicine degree in 2004 from the University of Tennessee Health Science Center in Memphis. After medical school, Dr. Choo completed his residency in anesthesia at the Ochsner Clinic Foundation in New Orleans. Dr. Choo is the owner of Pain Consultants of East Tennessee and serves as the medical director for the PCET Surgical Center. Dr. Choo has been extremely active in advocating for solutions to the opioid crisis, while at the same time protecting chronic pain patients' needs. Dr. Choo served on Governor Bill Haslam's Chronic Pain Guidelines panel in 2014, which assisted in the Tennessee Department of Health in drafting guidelines that would assist legislators to address the state's ongoing challenges associated with prescription drug use. In addition, Dr. Choo has appeared before the Tennessee governors, the Tennessee General Assembly, Senate, and House Health Committees to testify in support of strengthening laws for pain management practices across the state. Dr. Choo and his team are proud supporters of the Pain and Palliative Care Service at East Tennessee Children's Hospital and has raised more than $75,000 through various events since 2018. In 2018, Dr. Choo was presented with the Metro Drug Coalition's Commitment to Service Award at their 6th Annual Community Champions Award banquet. Dr. Choo has been voted top doc for pain management by local area physicians for 8 consecutive years. And in 2019, Dr. Choo presented at the University of Tennessee TEDx Conference. Please join me in welcoming Dr. James Choo.
Good morning. Well, really excited to be here today. This is a subject that's kind of near and dear to my heart, and in a lot of ways what I'm going to do is kind of tell you how I really came to really try to understand this problem in general, and kind of walk you through those steps, because this is an ongoing journey. I think it's something that I'm continuing to learn about and kind of fashion our clinical practices in order to kind of address this from our perspective, our specialty in general. But so this is an evolution, and I want to take you through that with my thought process of this problem and bring it and highlight it to all of you guys that this problem is not going away. And we have different names for it, opioid crisis and other drug crisis, but there's something underlying that's much deeper, much more troubling. It's endemic to everything that we do in our society, and it touches the darkest problems that we have. This is the chaos among us, the hell on earth that really begins early in life. And as educators, I would think that you would also be interested in this topic just for those very reasons. And so, why would a pain doctor be coming in front of a bunch of educators on this subject? It's a good question, because I never thought in 10 years I'd be here before a group of educators talking about this. But pain is my specialty. Pain is, amongst all of us in America, it affects over 1 1/4 of Americans. The number one reason to access health care. It's a $600 billion problem in annual expenses and lost wages and medical expenditure, which exceeds diabetes, cancer, and heart disease combined. It is my field, my work. and I think it's a great profession, but we were mired in a problem, all right, and we were oftentimes the scapegoat for some of the bigger ills that we have today. When you think of pain management, pain medicine, obviously the first things that come into your mind are pill mills and pill pushers and drug addicts and all that kind of stuff. And so really, that all started about 20 years ago when we were talking about the fifth vital sign, this actual well-intentioned effort to help pain patients, where we equated pain scores with pain treatment and pharmaceutical interests that were glommed onto that idea that said, hey, you need to treat pain aggressively, treat it like a blood pressure. You got a pain score, you give them more meds, you give them more pills, and then eventually the pain will drop just like a blood pressure. And that led to a lot of problems, and those well-intentioned federal efforts led to some entrepreneurial problems here in all over the country, but in particular East Tennessee. So when I came out of training, I thought that I would be doing a lot of these great procedures and help my patients in a lot of ways. Little did I realize when I landed back in my hometown in Knoxville, Tennessee, that we would be in the midst of a huge epidemic and a huge problem. In particular, pill mills in this area exploded when Florida cracked down, and all the pill mills started coming here into East Tennessee and Appalachia. And in Knox County, at the height of the pill mill issue, we had over 40 pain clinics in Knox County alone, in the surrounding regions from Knoxville to Morristown, so almost 70 pain clinics. And that is when I started getting involved with this problem, because a lot of the law enforcement were saying, you pain doctors are the problems that we have right now. We need to stop you guys. We need to shut you down. You need to stop doing what you're doing. And I just gotten out of medical school and medical training and had all this debt, and I'm like, hi, I'm Dr. James Choo. Let's talk about this. I got debts to pay. So, but what really started the attention to this entire crisis in our area was neonatal absence syndrome. East Tennessee Children's Hospital quickly became one of the leading institutions, and also the University of Tennessee, in treating this ailment. We had now over 1,000 babies that are born every single year in the state of Tennessee with this affliction, where mothers are using drugs and exposing their unborn child to these drugs, right? And actually, there's some signs and hopes now that we're actually starting to see a decrease in neonatal absence syndrome for the first time in a long time. But this is what alarmed legislators and really got them motivated in order to think about this more seriously. And as I started getting involved, and a whole bunch of other people, we started seeing that our efforts to close down pill mills and led to some other problems. Okay, so these prescribed pills that were quite controlled in a lot of ways, because we know a milligram of oxycodone per se, we know that when you take that particular pill, you're getting a milligram of oxycodone. Now, if you're talking about as these pill mills started decreasing, the number of prescribed drugs started dropping, we saw a vacuum that was filled by these illicit drugs where there were no controls whatsoever. So paradoxically, what we were seeing is that with fentanyl, which is a drug that we actually use pharmaceutically, but these drugs were being brought in illegally, there were no controls. And so as the pills started dropping, and I was one of these people that said, hey, once we start dropping these pills, we're going to save a lot of lives. Paradoxically, we saw more deaths as a result. And so other issues started popping up. I said, well, you know, once we start treating these individuals, these addicts that are out there, well, maybe we'll start saving more lives. But and there are other drugs that are out there to help people. This Suboxone is one of them. And it's a drug that helps with the cravings of those who are addicted to opioids. But we started to see that these drugs were having its own effects in the jail systems, that as we were taking away opioids for pain and replacing them with a different type of opioid for addiction, that these drugs that were claimed to be non-abusable were being abused in the jail system. And it just kind of showed me that some of these patients and these people that are in the jail systems that are recovering from addiction were extremely motivated, right? So we have life-saving drugs that are out there called naltrexone and naloxone that some of our first responders have. And what things that we were pushing for was to have these drugs out on the hands of these first responders. Some of these first responders would treat some of the patients or these people that were found down. They'd wake up immediately, go to the ER, get treated, and go out immediately and get another hit, and then another naloxone. So it dawned on me some of these people were so gripped by this addiction that even the threat of death, incarceration, you name it, didn't scare them, so to speak. And really what we see in the media is that we call this an opioid crisis, right? How many times have we heard that this is an opioid crisis, an opioid crisis? But what is not being told is that in reality, when you observe the autopsy reports in this region alone, that those who have died from the so-called opioid overdoses really had a whole host of other drugs in their system, whether it's benzodiazepine, alcohol, cigarettes, right, and a whole host of other drugs that in their systems. So it wasn't just one. This is a polysubstance abuse crisis, right? So that is a misnomer, the opioid crisis, in my perspective, from especially the autopsy reports that I see. And so now we're seeing another problem. So whenever you close the entrepreneurial pill mill portions and you start cracking down on maybe homegrown meth and a lot of these amazing law enforcement initiatives that are out there to help with drug control, what we're seeing now is cartels influencing our communities. And if you don't think that the cartels aren't in this community, you'd be very wrong, because now we're seeing an explosion of methamphetamine as well. That's coming directly from Mexico itself. So it seems like the supply to me of drugs doesn't matter, because there will be another drug that replaces the ones that we get off the street, and that is for sure what we're seeing today. And so really, it begged the question to me when I was trying to figure all this stuff out. Well, deaths don't scare these people. Incarceration doesn't scare these people. And that there's drugs that will replace the other ones, and they have for a very, very long time. What is going on? All right, why are these people going to drugs to begin with? And what is more troubling, some of this data that we've been seeing right now, in the past 30 years, we're seeing the life expectancy in the United States of America dropping for the first time in 30 years. And if you compare this to the life expectancy of some of the richest countries on earth, why America? Case in Deaton from Princeton took a look at this information and looked at and kind of categorized it by racial categories. And non-Hispanic whites from 2014 and beyond were the demographic, especially in the middle ages, that were increasing in deaths. Okay, and a lot of people take this data and they say it's because of opioids. In part, opioids has been a part of the reasons why the non-Hispanic whites are dying at alarming rates. And I'm thinking to myself, well, I'm practicing East Tennessee, and I'm pretty sure I know that there's a huge population of non-Hispanic whites in East Tennessee, right? So, but what is a part of the story that no one really kind of emphasizes as much when we're talking about the media attention to the opioid crisis and opioid issues is that alcohol-related deaths were a big reason why Case in Deaton attributed to these kind of life expectancy changes in non-Hispanic whites. And also suicide. But we don't ever talk about those three issues that are causing the life expectancy to drop in America for the first time in 30 years. And so this quote I thought was fantastic. We think of opioids as something that's thrown petrol on the flames and made things infinitely worse, but the underlying deep malaise would be there even without the opioids. If you look at, these are economists, Case in Deaton. And they were looking at some of the issues in Appalachia and the job losses in particular areas that may have caused some of this deep malaise, right? And poverty is an underlying story in East Tennessee. This is a picture from years ago, decades ago, in Appalachia. And poverty has been a part of the culture here. And this is, of course, Dolly Parton's coat of many colors that was designed by her mother at the time. It was a story of how her mother didn't have enough money to buy a nice coat, so she cobbled it together with some rags here and there, and she thought it was made fun of and made this incredible song. And now she wears this blouse of many colors, probably designed by Giorgio Armani. So things can break, right? But really, in the end, if we recognize this individual as Popcorn Sutton, who is a bootlegger, a moonshiner, and poverty is a real underlying theme in rural Appalachia. We're, of course, in the foothills of Appalachia. And we're talking about centuries of poverty. We're talking about the first reasons for people to move into this area. The Scott-Irish, from hundreds of years ago, came to live in this area for freedoms that they did not have, religious persecution, whatever it may be. Came to Pennsylvania in general to set up shop, found that they couldn't afford to live in Pennsylvania and moved into this region because it turns out that the hills of East Tennessee and Appalachia were a lot like the lands in Scotland and Ireland. They brought with them whiskey technology in order to cure what ails them, and also as a commodity, all right? So something that elicit a drug of some sort to pay for the little things in life that you may not be able to afford. And if you don't believe me, we had this crazy win last night, but the fight song in and of itself, where do we get our corn from? And deep within the song itself, there's a tagline that says, once two strangers came from Rocky Top looking for a moonshine still. Strangers ain't come down from Rocky Top, we reckon they never will. And I always thought that was because, well, these two strangers loved drinking moonshine, got up to the hills of Tennessee and fully enjoyed, drinking and living in the mountains and all that kind of stuff. But what they were talking about were revenuers in the area, the people that actually taxed whiskey for the first time. And when they didn't come down from Rocky Top, that means that they were put in the ground by the moonshiners and disappeared off the face of the earth. And that has been lampooned in more popular culture when you've got two good old boys from Hazard County, Kentucky, getting chased by the law, but in their fast cars, and those fast cars and this moonshine, whiskey road, and all that kind of stuff, taking your moonshine from the holler to the big city in order to provide for your family and make some money and do something illegal, being chased by the cops, by the revenuers, and all that kind of stuff. Well, that leads to great TV sitcom, not so great, but also leads to NASCAR today. And then once Prohibition ends, the number one cash crop since that time, up until fairly recently, was marijuana. So it's another substance, something that helps you cure what ails you, something that helps you with your impoverished condition, something that gives you this ambiguous relationship with the law, on and on and on and on it goes, right? And there's a great book by J.D. Vance that talks about his experience living in Appalachia. This is a classic description of the non-Hispanic whites' plight during his time. He ended up becoming a Yale law graduate, and Ron Howard is taking this book that has been a national bestseller and turning it into a movie today, but it is a fantastic read on what's been going on in Appalachian culture. But so another thing that really popped up in my mind when it came to intergenerational problems is when I talked to Dr. Towers over at the University of Tennessee, and he has been exemplary in his work with neonatal abstinence syndrome. And in my conversations with him, he would tell me that one thing that struck him mostly about the problems that he's seen with the women that are having these babies, they're taking drugs, multiple different types of drugs, whatever drugs that they can get their hands on, polysubstance abuse, correct? Is that he was talking about the intergenerational trauma, rapes, physical, emotional, sexual abuse that have gone on and on and on, the poverty that he's seen. Because what I have thought in the media, which was disingenuous about pill mills and whatnot, is that we tried to do things, quote unquote, the right way as best as we could. We never saw pregnant women in our clinics. We never saw the quote unquote drug abusers, in full, like some of these other quote unquote pill mills. And I was always surprised by these stories about pregnant women and how many that were out there, because we never actually saw them ourselves, and because it's fundamentally a different population altogether. Those who've been traumatized versus those who've been pained. That yes, there is some overlap, but that's not what we're seeing. And my conversations with Dr. Towers and our addiction colleagues really kind of illustrated the fact that there was something else that was going on, and it didn't matter what the drug was, that was affecting these people making the decisions that they were, these kind of impulsive decisions. And I think a lot of these women knew that they shouldn't be taking these drugs, but they were doing it anyway, in spite of incarceration, in spite of the risk to the health of themselves and their babies and whatnot. And another troubling factor is that teen suicide is on the rise in Tennessee as well. So what is going on? And so I found the ACE study to be one of the most impactful studies I have ever read in my career. And Vincent Folletti was the gentleman who came across this particular study, or this idea. And he was an internal medicine physician in California who had this very successful weight loss clinic back in the 90s and prior. And one of his patients had lost an incredible amount of weight, over 100 pounds, and was surprised to see within a few months that this lady had gained almost all of it back, if not more. And he said, well, you were doing so well. What's going on? Why is it that you have gained all of this weight back? And she said to him, well, I was losing weight, I was getting all this attention, and I started eating and eating and eating again. And he said, well, why is that? And she says, to be overweight is to be overlooked. And so that profound statement from his one patient led him to believe that there's something else that's driving behaviors besides just weight, or besides some of these decisions. And it turns out, of course, she had a history of sexual abuse early on in his life. And so he got together with Kaiser Permanente and the CDC, Dr. Robert Onda, and put together this survey. And it's broken down. So this study is broken down to abuse, neglect, dysfunction in the home, whether it's physical, emotional, sexual abuse, physical, emotional neglect, mental illness, incarceration, mothers treated violence, substance abuse, and divorce. And it's usually just a yes or no answer. And if you score yes or no, you count it up, tally it up. And the studies were absolutely profound. So it turns out that and these are experiences before the age of 18. So for thousands of patients within the system that are fairly well affluent, it turns out that if you score one or more, and if you score more as you score, it becomes a dose-dependent effect. The more likely you are to have a whole host of chronic diseases and substance abuse issues, early death, and it's a dose-dependent effect. The more that you have, the worse it gets. So with high ACE scores, you're more likely to commit suicide, more likely to smoke, more likely to be an alcoholic, have sexually transmitted diseases, inject drugs, be absent from work, experience depression, serious job loss, and more. More likely you are to experience anxiety, depression, unintended pregnancies. The worse you do in school, cancer and diabetes go up. So even if you have someone with a high ACE score and they don't smoke, they're still upwards to 360 times more likely to die earlier, depending on what you have these chronic illnesses, especially ischemic heart disease, and other factors as well. Harvard has taken a look at ACE scores, and they attribute risks to all of these factors, whether it comes to life dissatisfaction, separation, divorce, cancer. Cancer in particular, I thought was absolutely wild. And what does it cost our society? In Tennessee alone, in 2017, the Sycamore Institute calculated ACE scores to contribute at least $5.2 billion in medical expenses and lost wages, especially when it comes to these disease sets. And I think this number is actually pretty low, because if we don't include the opioid crisis in these numbers, which is, you can probably add another $1 billion or $2 on top of that. Our number one ACEs in Tennessee is divorce, next to substance abuse, emotional abuse, and on and on and on. Happily, we have almost half of the Tennesseans with no ACEs, which is fantastic. This is another ACE category for Tennessee, just recently. I think in 2017 this stat came out. So you're more likely to have poor mental health, poor physical health, and more likely to smoke and drink with the higher ACEs that you have. Really, it leads to this idea that your adverse experiences early in life have a profound change on your neural development. We'll talk about more of this, your social and cognitive and emotional development. Your risky behaviors, social problems, and death early on in life. To put it into perspective, for a medical provider, if you have an ACE score of 6+, your likelihood of early death is increased significantly. So you're more likely to die 20 years earlier, right? So say our average life expectancy in the United States is about 75, 77. Puts you at your life expectancy of 6+ more on your ACE scores to around 57. That equals the life expectancy in some of the poorest countries on earth, whether it's Burundi, Somalia, some of the poorest countries in Africa. They are our sickest patients, but we don't ever think about it in those terms. The other author was Robert Onda from the CDC, and when he was looking at this data, he was absolutely staggered by what he was seeing. He was seeing that child abuse in and of itself was this endemic problem, maybe the worst problems that we have in our society, that would cause, if we were to eradicate child abuse more than cancer and diabetes combined, as far as the cost to society, if we were to eradicate child abuse, we cut down depression in half, alcoholism by 2/3, suicide, IV drug use, domestic violence by 3/4, which is absolutely unbelievable. Why aren't we talking about it in these particular terms? Why aren't we saying, why don't we talk about the opioid crisis and the school shootings and the problems that we have at home in these very, very certain terms that we've known about for 20+ years? And the neuroimaging studies in the past 25 years, 20 years are absolutely staggering. These are CT scans, but what's even more, that helps us illustrate some of the problems even more for us science nerds is functional MRI work, which I won't get into, but a lot of you don't teach science, or maybe most of you aren't scientists, but you can sure as heck look at the difference between the two brains here. And actually, Dr. Towers is looking at some of the brain changes with substances as well. And it's also quite staggering how some of these substances can change the brain. But why does the brain change in particular? Okay, so in the medical world, you have to figure out a mechanism of which to figure out why these things happen. And it turns out that it's because of this hypopituitary axis. Okay, so the portions of the brain that control the stress responses to the body are fundamentally affected. These are actually advantageous to us when we are fighting a tiger or running away from danger or fleeing from someone that's trying to harm you. It gives you that extra energy, especially the cortisol in your body, the stress response, to get away from the dangers that are out there. But what if that danger is your mother or your father or a loved one, and it goes on and on and on and on and on and on and on, whether it's through sexual abuse, you name it. Well, this axis ramps up. The cortisol in your body keeps on pumping out more and more stress hormone. It doesn't shut down. What it does, it starts affecting the brain in and of itself, where portions of the brain start shrinking. Especially we'll talk about this later on, but the prefrontal cortex, okay, the portion of the brain, and the neocortex, the newest part of the cortex in our evolutionary history, that helps us with flexibility of mind, learning, thinking, other emotional control, you name it. And also the hippocampus, which is where our memories are set. But as this goes on and on and on, the cortisol levels continue to spike, and you have adrenal fatigue, which is, and also changes in your immune system, changes in the brain, changes in the body, the emotions, you name it. All right, and so lifespan of ACEs have a widespread impact on one's life, whether it's during these critical portions of development, which we'll talk about here in just a second. And your genetics obviously play a role. Abuse has a role in what we call the epigenetics of an individual. But it manifests itself for the lifetime in all of these problems, whether it's poverty, crime, risky sex, alcohol, obesity, school, impaired cognition, psychiatric disorders, and chronic disease. Right? And so, as we're learning about the development of the brain, it's really changing our models on how we think about disease, and especially in the space of mental health. And I found this to be really, really amazing, okay, because this is something that I see all the time. As I get a patient's chart around a crap ton of meds, and they've got all these psychiatric disorders and illnesses, and it seems like they've just got too many problems and don't know how to get a handle on all of these chronic diseases. And maybe they have like 5 or 6 different psychiatric diagnoses, and Brandy and I take a look at that patient and we're like, let's try to scoop this one out the door. And I said, I don't know what to do with this. It's too much. It's overwhelming for us in a lot of ways. But really, in the end, what we're probably seeing is a manifestation of trauma that's underlying that we don't really talk about. And it's very, very, very uncomfortable to talk to a patient, engage them about sexual abuse or what their relationships with their parents while they were going through traumatic divorce, what it might have been like to deal with a family member that has been incarcerated. These are very, very painful experiences that have indelible marks within the body, but also punctuated in certain periods of time in their life, especially in the early stages of life when they've got a lot of neuroplastic change where the brain is really growing quite fast. And maybe even in the portions of adolescence, also in the brain, it starts expanding quite quickly, and that's when you see these middle schoolers do all these crazy things. The incentive portions of the brain are really, really high. The cognitive controls aren't quite there. They don't really mature until you're like 25 years old. And that's why, as one of my colleagues says, that you should never have your daughters marry a man that's not at least 25 plus years of age. That's when they start, really kind of thinking with their brains, so to speak. But in particular, these areas are these diseases that we see so often, ADHD, dissociative performance disorder, personality disorders, may be manifestations of particular complex traumas that are punctuated in certain portions of these people's lives. And we have this book called the DSM-4 criteria, which looks at all of the psychiatric diagnoses that are out there, and they were never supposed to be a set of diagnoses at all. And they turned into psychiatric diagnoses, but they were really supposed to be a list of symptoms of psychological problems. And so when we look at these lists of people and they've got ADHD, bipolar, this, and that, could it very well be that there was a developmental trauma early on in life, and there's a lot of movements to think about this as a developmental trauma disorder rather than a lot of psychological disorders? I think that helps us really kind of reconstruct this notion that the social determinants of health are so much more important in the mental health of an individual. And really, if you think about this on the terms of the individual, someone who has been traumatized early in their life, what are they experiencing? Okay? Someone who's having these flashbacks and nightmares of really horrible situations that they've experienced, maybe on and on again, whether it's physical abuse, you name it. Insomnia, disassociation, they're trying to distance themselves away from these intolerable sensations within their body. Some fascinating work with functional MRI work and trauma with Dr. Bessel van der Kolk up in Harvard, looking at what portions of the brains are online and offline during emotional trauma. And really, in the end, we're talking about drug disorder, drug use. We're talking about someone who may very well be trying to escape an intolerable sensation within their body and trying to find something else to make them feel differently from their situation. And you've got to think about those pregnant women. You've got to think about maybe some of our students, what they may be going through during these times. And really, it's as if you're transfixed, this hypopituitary axis that's going on, these stress hormones, these intolerable sensations in your body. You're stuck in a fight or flight or freeze, and your body cannot escape that sensation. It's the reptilian portion of your brain that's on fire. And really, if we're to think about the second law of thermodynamics, and we think about entropy, okay, for this fundamental principle that really rules how the universe in a lot of ways works, and for physics people out there can attest to. And really from order to disorder, that's what, when we think of the second law of thermodynamics. What is trauma in particular but social entropy, right? The chaos of our social lives. And really, there's more hope out there. You just really have to take away some of these, the kind of overarching stories in the media, get away from our biases, because really, in the end, since the age of enlightenment, all right, we have to thank Locke and David Hume and some other great thinkers like Spinoza. We've had an amazing amount of improvements in our humanity in the past 200-300 years, because it's really easy to think of this as a fatalistic problem, these intergenerational problems that were going on for hundreds of years, that there's no end in sight, that this is just how the people in these particular areas, those people out there, that's how they will be, there's no way of changing their social circumstances. But really, poverty, war, disease, famine, violence, democracy, market-based economies, all of these have improved. There's less war, less death in war, but despite what the media will tell you, our life expectancies around the world have improved tremendously. Education for both men and women around the world has improved tremendously. And really, since our prehistoric notions, our social brains, the reason why we may have a brain to begin with is to engage in a social world, to be a part of a tribe. And when that is broken, that leads to this disparities in health and these problems in health. We have to update our mental models, and that's what the Age of Enlightenment has helped us do to fight social entropy. We have to change our mental models for health, social determinants of health. It is more important to have a good zip code for your life expectancy than there is to almost anything else. It's the number one reason, the number one marker that correlates how long someone will live. If you live in Chevy Chase, Maryland, your life expectancy could be in the 90s. But if you live 6 miles away from Chevy Chase, Maryland, in another part of Maryland, your life expectancy drops to your early 60s. And really, this mental model that we have to change is the architecture of the brain. What really is foundational into the health and lives of our kids. And rat models have really helped us illustrate that during high levels of stress, and this is a study in McGill University up in Canada, that those rats that licked their pups more often during stressful moments those pups were braver. They were able to solve problems more directly. Their hippocampus, the areas of the brain strengthened. They were smarter, more robust, more resilient. Studies of attachment theories have really helped us show that the early stages of life, that if you had a strong attachment to your caregiver, one committed adult, that you have a higher rate of predictability of who will graduate from high school. So there's a study that showed with 77% accuracy by the age of 4, those psychologists that were able to tell whether or not a person had a secure attachment, a child had a secure attachment or not, were able to predict more than IQ whether or not that patient would graduate from high school. And really, it's this serve and return response that has been so helpful in attachment. If you leave a child and they cry and they don't have a responsive adult to help them self-regulate and navigate some of those stresses, that their cortisol levels, those HPA axis increases tremendously. Even in the most impoverished area, if you have a serve and return, a secure attachment, that those cortisol levels drop to normal for those who aren't living in impoverished conditions as well. And really, it goes to this really important factor, and especially when it comes to success in school and jobs and everything else, more so than IQ, that the executive function portion of the brain, that prefrontal cortex, which is more malleable than IQ, all right? It is something that can be influenced through most of your life, but in particular, the early stages of life and through adolescence, Executive function is basically like your control tower to the airports, right? And so it allows you for flexible thinking. It allows you to kind of juggle multiple tasks at once, help you to regulate yourself, your body, regulate your emotions. This really doesn't come online to 25, but it's fully affected. It's the portion of the brain that's fully affected by trauma in and of itself. All right, but if that area of the brain is fostered and nurtured, it allows us to have the full expression of that individual, a curious individual, a person that wants to learn, can regulate themselves during stressful moments, and be a more attentive student coming in. And really, at the age of 25 or so, your brain's ability to change responses really kind of stops. So it's really important, as you can kind of see here, through the development of the brain in this early stages of life, where we really need to spend our time and resources. And if you don't believe me, Nobel Prize winning laureate James Hetman up at the University of Chicago took a look at early care, early development, early care, and where our dollars were best spent. Dollars best spent in these prenatal programs had the most impact on that individual over time in your society. And then other economists have taken a look at it. For every dollar spent on home visitation programs, daycare, preschool programs, well, there's a $7 saved when it came to welfare, substance abuse, treatment, incarceration, and these individuals were better off with better jobs in the future. There was a psychologist back in the 70s that had these home visitation programs in these hard parts of Baltimore. 20 years later, those people were less likely to be in prison, less likely to, more likely to graduate from high school, and more likely to have a good paying job as well. So these, really in the end, Harvard has come up with a 3-step model based off the brain in and of itself. And really those 3 steps in order to effectively change a population in particular is to look at the support responsive relationships that reduce the sources of stress, strengthens these life skills, self-regulation skills, and other kind of skills for success for an individual, and base your models of care for your community on these 3 fundamental core principles. There are a lot of other people that have taken on, for the past 15, 20 years, some of these thoughts on brain architecture and the health of an individual and their likeliness to do well in life, and build programs that are doing remarkable work that can be seen on Harvard's website. Even schools in the Nashville area are taking this trauma-informed approach and taking it to heart. I think Hamilton Elementary is in one of the poorest sections of Nashville, and it's a trauma-informed program, and we'll be excited to see what some of their outcome studies look like afterwards. And really, the toxic stress, how do we model our cares in some of the worst places that are out there, some of the worst zip codes that are out there, and how can we make our social policies really kind of support those individuals? Because I'm all in favor of utilizing our resources in the best form and fashion. It seems like to me in the first 2 years of life, they pay off in dividends. But those are my resources, and that's all I've got for you guys today. Thank you.